But let me go across first to Sushant Sareen and explain to our viewers two things. One, there have been 19 rounds of talks. These talks have been happening for the better part of the last 3 years. There are still two friction points. Why are they not able to resolve that? And B, do you think the time has come for this to be escalated to a higher level of engagement, because army commanders may not be in a position to resolve this issue?
Zaka, this hasn't been resolved because the Chinese don't want to resolve it. They created the problem in the first place, and clearly they think that they can drag this for as long as they can, and maybe try and extract something from India and then throw some crumbs our way. Thankfully, so far it seems that the government of India is not falling for it. And as your report yourself or your reporter just said, that the Chinese are looking for normalization, but at the current, and maybe with some concessions. But India wants a much more expansive kind of an agreement, and disengagement, de-escalation, and whatever else follows from that. So one is that. The second is you can escalate it to the level of the principals, but the principals have already given certain directions to the junior officers, right? And it hasn't sorted out. And it isn't sorting out because the principals in China don't want it to be sorted out. You see Xi Jinping, the emperor of China, making all kinds of bizarre, belligerent statements that be ready for war, we will fight war, and I don't know whatever else nonsense he keeps spouting from his mouth. So when you have dictators in countries like China, then you will have situations like this on the borders. Having said that, I think what is important to understand is that from the news reports which came today morning and yesterday, it's very clear that India is not backing down. It is also very clear that the government of India is giving a very clear indication of the level of preparedness and how far we are ready to take it if push comes to shove. We don't want it to come to that, but if it comes to that, we are prepared. Okay. So I think on the whole, it is a political decision which will ultimately be taken by Beijing and perhaps by New Delhi together. Until then, I don't think there's any solution. There's
going to be any resolution. So, Colonel Dini, you've commanded these heights when you were in service. Tell us and tell our viewers why these 2 points, Depsang and Demchok, are remaining as the two last sort of unresolved issues ever since this crisis came to light in the summer of 2020.
Zaka, first and foremost, I think what you covered in your introduction during this program, the strategic importance of these two places itself makes these places very sensitive. As you rightly mentioned, that both these places are plain areas where the mechanized operations can be carried out in this high altitude area. So we know that wherever mechanized operations are carried out, those are the areas where you have a distinct, the battle or the entire campaign is decided on those operations. So therefore, there is a criticality for these areas from both sides. Like you rightly mentioned in the Depsang Plains, where the DBO road is there, it's closer to the Aksai Chin area. So those criticalities there. Similarly, in Demchok, it has again mechanized operation terrain, wherein there is an approach towards Leh and such like things. So first and foremost is this purely because of the strategic and the tactical significance of this area. That is why this has not been resolved. Secondly, very importantly, Zaka, these two areas have been a legacy issue for many years. So it's not the first time that we are going through the same issues discussing Demchok and Depsang. However, the other 5 areas which has been resolved was basically a problem which was generated post May 2020. So that is why I feel that maybe in this time when there is a friction and when there is a discussion happening, I think India is taking a very hard stand that let's resolve these two issues also, so that there is peace and tranquility in the real sense which can be maintained along the LAC. I find that probably we are taking a hard stand that unless you resolve this, there will be no normalization.
Yeah, I just want to bring that to the attention of our viewers, that in Depsang as well as in Demchok, There were previous flare-ups that had happened, I think in Depsang in 2013, and this was just before, I remember this, I was covering this from China. This was just before Li Keqiang's first visit to India after he became premier, and they managed to resolve that. Shiv Shankar Menon, I think, was the NSA at that time. They managed to resolve that just in time before that visit happened. Similarly, again in 2015, after Mr. Modi became the Prime Minister, and I think it was again just before he was going for his first visit to China as Prime Minister, again Depsang flared up. So these two areas we have seen sort of flare-ups in the past. But I want to take a slightly more holistic picture, and I want to ask Aina Tangen, and then after that Andrew Liang. Aina Tangen, the view here in India seems very simple, that India is building infrastructure. You heard Colonel Dinny a moment ago talking about this very, very critical DSDBO road, which connects Dipsang all the way up to the Karakoram Pass on the north, and of course it strategically sits between Aksai Chin and the Siachen Glacier, so it's a strategic point. The view here in India is China willy-nilly, by flaring up 7 points in the summer of 2020, and 5 of those we've seen disengagement. We've not seen de-escalation, but we've seen disengagement. What it wants to do is to force the issue in both Depsang and Demchok, thereby forcing India to accept or concede in these two areas. Unfortunately for China, for the last 3 years, India has refused to try and accept any kind of solution that's been imposed on India, any kind of middle ground that's being imposed by China, because India realizes precisely why these two areas are strategically important.
Yes, I'm sure there's a question in there somewhere, but let me attempt to answer it. The fact is, you stated correctly, this is a strategic point. So in the past, it's been an issue. It's an issue now, and potentially in the future, even if there's some sort of withdrawal agreement, it could be another major issue. So, what do we learn from this? The only way out of this is a diplomatic solution. Where the main players sit down and say, look, this is how we can settle this and have an actual line, a demarcation line, a border between the countries. That would be by far the best thing. So if you want to leave things to generals, of course, anything of strategic value, they're going to say, no, we can't give that up, because if we give it up, we give it to them. If they have it, they have this strategic advantage. So it's a zero-sum game for generals, but it is a larger game for those who are in charge of countries and trying to figure out where they're going. So there's no question in Beijing's mind that suddenly, that India is going to roll over and play dead on these issues. I don't know where anyone would get that idea. These are contentious issues, as I said, strategic. The issue is, when will there be a diplomatic solution that ends all this nonsense?
No, but even if I agree with you on the principle that I don't think this can be resolved at the level of army commanders. I agree with that in principle. But I don't see any diplomat, an Indian diplomat at that, or an Indian political leader in a position to say, okay, let's accept some kind of a buffer zone, if you will, in Depsang and Demchok. I don't see how that would be acceptable. I don't see how anyone, diplomat or politician in India, would buy that.
I agree with you. I mean, no one wants to look weak at this point. But what I'm saying is, diplomatically, the larger solution is to agree not on a buffer zone, but to agree to an actual border, and whatever that entails. That would be the mark of somebody who is a great person. Two leaders coming together and settling something that could potentially plunge both of them into, a war. You want to avoid that. Neither China nor India are interested in wars. They're interested in the welfare of their people. So that should be the number one issue. But I agree with you. We're not in disagreement.